Hey there, YouTube land. Today we're doing another reel disassembly video. And today we're going to work on the Mitchell 300C. And in this video I will show you exactly what makes this different from both the standard 300 and the 300A. So let's get started. So what you'll need... Sorry, I got a cup in there from something. What you'll need is, just like in my 300A video, you'll need some small flathead screwdrivers. Again, I have my two that I like to use for this. Kind of a medium-sized flathead screwdriver and a 12mm socket. And of course, you want to make sure you have a parts tray for your parts. So just like in the video on the 300A, we're going to start by removing the handle. Now, one of the main differences you can see right off the bat, let me just set this down, is that there's a collar on the handle. So as you can see, there's a little well, this post is shaped differently. And actually, inside the collar, we just put the handle in the parts tray, there is a shim or a washer inside that collar. Do not lose that. If you lose that and you put your handle back on, the reel will freeze up, because that washer or shim, whichever you want to call it, provides clearance on the post. That way your reel can operate smoothly. So I usually just leave it in the collar. But if it falls out, if a shim like that falls out of there, that's what it's for, and that's where it goes. And now, let's remove the spool. Just press that button and pop it off. And maybe in this video, I'll show you how to disassemble the spool and show you what it's made of, even though it's typically not necessary, but maybe some of you are curious. And now we could take off our three side plate screws. Throw those in our parts tray as well, so we don't lose them. Oops. Most of your standard Mitchells like this, of this size, like your 300, 400, you know, your 300A, your 300C, your 410, your 330, 440, they all pretty much disassemble the same. But again, they all have their differences. Now, the 300C was first made in 1969, and they made it, I believe, all the way up till 1985. This one, I believe, is from either 1969 or 70, because it does not have a letter in the serial number, and that started in 1971. So, and now we're into the gears. Now, as you can see, the 300C is fairly similar to a standard 300, more so than a 300A. As you can tell, this gear that helps drive your rotor is shaped more like a star. And just like on the 300A, you want to watch for the shims underneath. So we're going to pull this off slow. And I'm sure, hopefully you'll be able to see that. And like I mentioned in my other video, make sure you keep the shims in the order that they come off. So I'm going to set my gear down. Let me adjust the camera for you a little bit. And then we're going to set the shims down in order. And in my case, I have two. I think it's just two. Yep. But yours may differ. Mitchell kind of shimmed all these reels differently from the factory. And from time to time, you do have to re-shim one to get it to operate more smoothly. So now we can take off this gear. I'm going to put that in my tray. And then we're going to flip the anti-reverse off. Now here's where one of the other main differences is going to be. So I'm going to do this slow and steady. But as you can see, on this main gear, in that collar, there's roller bearings. That is what makes a 300C different than a standard 300 or a 300A, is these roller bearings. Now, you can take this off. I'm going to recommend, however, that you don't take that off, because if you remove that collar, then there is a chance that those roller bearings will fall out, and they are not easy to reinstall. So unless the bearing is bad and you need to change it, do not take that off. Just clean around it and re-lubricate it and leave it alone. And there's actually two sets, and when we get to the rotor, I'll show you that. And just like on the 300A, you can take the anti-reverse dog off. The anti-reverse setup is the same. So now our side plate is disassembled. So now let's get into the housing. So you have a similar setup to the 300A. It has the block and whatnot. So you can just pop that off, pop this gear off, I should say. Pop your plate off, or your slide, probably the more proper name. And then you could pull the axle shaft out. And you could pull your oscillation plate out. And again, it also has that same lubrication port screw. But as I've mentioned in my video on the 300A, unless you have a really dirty reel, it's not usually necessary to take that out. But you can if you want. Alright. Get this screw out. Sorry guys, I'm working around my camera. There we go. So, get that in the tray. Pop the plate out. And now we're to the rotor. Again, pretty similar setup to a 300A. Again, you got to have the socket. There we go. So I'm just going to, like I said, once you get the seal broken, not broken, but once you get it loosened enough with the socket, you can take the rest of the way off with your fingers. That kind of just is a little easier. Now we can pull the rotor off, and I'm going to show you something else. And in this case, you do have a shim underneath your pinion gear, as you can see. So I'm going to set that down. This case I only have one, but again, yours may differ. So always keep track of how many you have, and if you have more than one, put them in the order you take them off, so you know how to put them back in. And just like on a 300A, you have your baffle plate shims. Let me set the baffle plate down. And we're going to take those off, making sure we keep them in the order that they come off. That way we know we're putting them back in the correct order. So now, if you take a look inside, let me see if I can get this just right. You can see there's roller bearings in the rotor. Same kind of thing, don't take those out unless you need to replace them. Just clean around them and re-lubricate them and leave them alone if the bearing is fine. And now you know the differences between a 300C and a 300A and a standard 300. if my camera will focus. There we go. Alright, let's begin our reassembly. Now, one trick you can do to keep the collar from coming out is I like to just keep one finger on it when reinstalling it. But first, we want to make sure we put that shim back in. And again, if you have multiple, make sure you put them back in the order that they came out. In this case, I only have one, so I don't really have to worry too much about that. And then what I do is I keep a finger on the collar and the rotor. That way, they won't pop out. And there we go. Now, what we want to do is put our shims back in or under the baffle plate, making sure we put them in the correct order. Okay. And then we'll put the baffle plate back on, and like on the 300A, as I showed you, there is a tab in the hole, and there is a slot in the post that the rotor goes on. And you have to line them up like that. And with the rotor nut, again, just kind of go in reverse until you feel it line up. Then just kind of tighten it as much as you can with your fingers. And then just give it a final, just snug it down with your socket. Oops. All right, let me move further back so maybe you can see it a little better. There we go. Bail is kind of getting in the way. And again, you don't have to take off the bail unless something's wrong with it. And now that we have that on, let's give this a spin. All right. Spinning nicely. So now what we can do is put the oscillation plate back on. And we can get our screws back in there. And again, you can use the same tricks I mentioned in my 300A video. You know, if you have a magnetic screwdriver, go ahead and use it. Or you can put a little bit of grease on there. And like I said, I've already cleaned and serviced this reel. But if you haven't done that, make sure you clean the parts before reassembly. And again, you know, make sure you don't tighten one down before the other. Just get them to an even level. And then you can tighten them down the rest of the way. Like that. And now we can put our axle shaft back in, making sure we put it through that hole. And you want to make sure the flat side goes up. So you want the flat side facing toward you. Like this. And then we can put our oscillation slide back on. Like so. And we'll get our oscillation gear back in. So this is the other trick I mentioned in my previous video. You can slide it to the bottom, put the gear down till you feel it line up, and now it's moving back and forth, or up and down I should say. So our housing, we're going to set that to the side, and we're going to go focus on the side plate. Sorry guys, my camera keeps wanting to not stay in focus. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to put the anti-reverse dog back in. I should have done that in my previous video, but I didn't really think about it. But usually that's what I like to put back in. And then make sure you trip it off so you can get your main gear back in easier. So now we're going to get the main gear back in. Making sure we are aware of those roller bearings. And the hole is bigger on this to accommodate them. Just slide it back in like that. Now let's get our star drive gear back in. Again, making sure we put these in the order that they came off. We just put them around that post. And again, always expect to see shims under that gear. And then we'll slide the star gear back over that. Okay. Now you could flip the anti-reverse dog back on if you want. Make sure that works good. And then we could put this gear back onto the post. And your side plate is done. And now we can start. We could put our side plate and housing back together. Or, yeah, we put these back together like this. Make sure your gears line up like that. And then we could put our 3 side plate screws back in. And the screws on these are shorter than on a 300A. They're more similar to a standard 300. So, and again, like in my previous video, make sure you don't tighten one down before the other. Just get them down to about an even level before tightening them the rest of the way. And that's kind of just to keep them all lined up too. That way they're all good lined up, like I say. Now that they're at about an even level, we can tighten them down. It also avoids cross-threading. There we go. Now we can put our handle back on. And remember, make sure you keep that shim in the collar. And now we're going to put the collar back over the threads on the handle. Like that. And then we're going to put the handle back on, just like any other Mitchell reel, turning it counterclockwise. At least on the right-handed models. And then we're going to put our spool back on. Just slide it on the shaft till you hear it click. Like that. And there we go. Just test it. Make sure everything works. Okay. So I'm gonna show you guys how to disassemble the spool. So let me just adjust my camera for a minute. Okay, so like a lot of spinning reel spools, all you have to do to disassemble this is get your drag knob off. Just unscrew it. And then you're going to come across your drag tension spring. So you can push through on the post to get the bottom part out. And underneath we just have a Teflon drag washer. You do not need to lubricate these because Teflon is a petroleum product, so it's basically self-lubricating. And then we could take our bottom post out. And underneath you will see a drag spring. You can remove that, you just push up on it. Like this, making sure we do not shoot that spring. And now we can, sorry, it's kind of fighting me. Actually, you want to go the other way so the hook doesn't interfere. Like that. And then if you have a really dirty spool, you would start cleaning it after, obviously, if you just got the reel and it had any line on it, make sure you strip that line off. And then give it a good scrub. So to reassemble, we're going to start with the drag spring. So with the drag spring, your drag click spring, it has a little hump in the middle, and that hump goes around this stud, the bottom of this stud right here. So just kind of push down on it, and then kind of push up, and make sure it hooks around the stud. If you need to, you can use a flathead screwdriver to push down on it. In this case, we didn't have to do that, but sometimes you have to. We can put our bottom post in. Now you want to make a note of this flat side, and I'll explain why in a minute. Alright, then you kind of just wiggle it in like this until you hear it snap in. You can hear that click spring. Okay. So the flat reason you want to make a note of the flat side is because on your drag tension spring, the hole is D-shaped and there's a flat spot in there, and you want to make sure you line those up like so. But first we need to put the Teflon drag washer back in. Oops. Sorry guys, I'm kind of fumbling around. So we'll put the Teflon washer in first, and now we can put our tension spring back in like so. And now we can put our drag adjustment knob back on like so. And now the spool is reassembled and ready to go back on the reel, which you just line up the axle shaft with the hole, push on it till it clicks, and there you go. So now you know how to disassemble and reassemble a Mitchell 300C, as well as how to disassemble a Mitchell 300 style spool. I hope this video was helpful, and thank you for watching. And if you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe. Have a good day.